Enrichment, Enlightenment, Mr. Royal Cutler, the spiritual leader of Chabad of Cary, North Carolina, guides anyone who has been searching for a meaningful life and conscious living. Join our discussions about the mundane, our daily activities, and then infuse every day with a spiritual twist from the inspired sages of the Talmud and Jewish mysticism, which many call Kabbalah. We learn from the root source of all religious monotheistic traditions and delve into the symbolism and levels of meaning from biblical stories.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. Yes, I have a little bit of a cough and cold today. I'm sure that'll be picked up in the online community as well. Thank you for joining us. Today's December 13th, 2016, and if you are tuning in wherever you are, all over the world, we would love to hear from you. We would love you to ask questions in the chat box, and a special thanks to our host, Amnon Nissan from Nissan Communications, for making this broadcast available. Because we will be taking a few weeks off at the end of the month, we'll be a little bit ahead. This week we're doing next week's Torah portion. Next week we're doing Hanukkah. So we're beginning today on 184. I chose this class because it's a neat idea that is very relevant to our lives today. And the story is one of Joseph. We know that Joseph is unfortunately hated by his brothers. They are jealous of him. And in next week's Torah portion, we will learn the long story of Joseph getting sold by his very own brothers and ending up as a slave. He's a slave in the house of an Egyptian named Potiphar. While he's in Potiphar's house as a slave, things go from bad to worse. He is accused of trying to seduce Potiphar's wife. So he goes from being a slave to being a prisoner. And then he is in the Egyptian prisons, whose conditions were a little bit worse than prisons today.
Sounds like what's going on in this world today.
So that's where he is. Wherever he is, he keeps quite busy. He tries to make the most of his time, and this is no exception. And we have a very long story we're going to read today about what happened, what transpired to Joseph while he is in prison. And the key word is dreams. There's a lot in Genesis about dreams. And let me just take a step back. What does Judaism say about dreams?
Oh.
Are they significant? Are they not significant? They could be. That's the Jewish answer. They could be. The Talmud actually writes that most dreams are not significant. For most people, when we dream, it's the leftover strands, the leftover thoughts, all the ideas, all the mush that went throughout the day in our minds that was never finalized, the loose ends, they come out. So in Kabbalah, it actually gives this metaphor. It says, just like when we sleep, we schwitz sometimes, we sweat. All the excess heat comes out. So to our mind sweats. This is what Kabbalah says. So the same idea that what we think about during the day, we dream about at night. So Kabbalah does say for most dreams of the average person, it's no more than a byproduct of what we thought about during the day. Now that's very telling. Is it not telling what we dream about? Maybe our mind is or is not where it should be during the day. So it might be telling. Not really. However, to say it has significance, most dreams, the Talmud says, is not that case. Now, we can't say all, because the Torah is full of significant dreams. And if we look in Jewish history, you will actually see records of people, righteous men and women, who, while they were dreaming at night, were privy to minor prophecy, let's word it. And that makes sense. Why? Because while a person sleeps, we know Kabbalah says that our soul, or part of the soul, recharges. It actually leaves our body, which is the reason why we wash our hands in the morning. Where does it go? It plugs back in. And if you're a holy soul, while that portion of the soul is plugging in, it can take a little bit back down. So we have stories of people who woke up with inspiration. You have stories in the Torah, in the Talmud, of people who had a serious question on their mind and they woke up with clarity with that answer. Sometimes it was a Talmudic question. So we cannot dismiss, we cannot discount all dreams. Clearly, there can be significance, but usually not. Usually not, but there are times where it says if a dream is repeating a lot, and we can have an entire class separately on dreams. There can be significance to it because it is the one time a day where our soul has the chance to reconnect. So it shouldn't be surprising if there's some significance. Pam, yeah.
Well, question. What happens if the dream keeps repeating itself a lot? Like people always dream about the same incident and
So I would say one of the signs that a dream might have a better chance of being significant is A, if it's especially vivid. B is if it repeated itself. And C is if you felt you had a pretty holy day that day. And relative to our life. Relative to our life, it wasn't a wasted day. It was a productive mitzvah-filled day. So that is one of the indicators in Torah that, not that for sure, but there's a better chance that dream might have some significance because there's less loose ends. There's less rubbish. There's more productivity that day. Yes?
So, and you may want to defer this, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But important dreams, significant dreams, are not restricted to Jews.
Not at all.
If we look at Pharaoh,
Absolutely.
not exactly a friend of the Jews, etc., he had a very important dream that was quite prophetic.
Absolutely. This is not a Jewish phenomena. This is a natural phenomena for everybody. Absolutely. In the Torah, we have Pharaoh who has dreams. We have a king Avimelech who has dreams a few weeks ago. Okay. But again, I mentioned that because we're going to dive into dreams. And it is good to know that they can be significant, but it's also good not to make too much of them. Especially if it's bothering you, if it's something negative, we say, push it away from your mind. If you're not able to do that, the Rebbe would say, give a little tzedakah. Yes.
My Bubby used to say, if you have a bad dream, it means everything's going to be good.
Good, there we go. And that will be the second text we'll have tonight. You know what? Let's actually start with that text once you're Bubby. Judy, why don't you say what you're Bubby?
188.
So we are now on 188. I want to first do text 2, but then afterwards go to the actual story of Joseph. But once we spoke about dreams generally, and if there are any questions from anyone online, I know dreams are an interesting topic, please let us know. So let's see what the Talmud says about dreams. Text 2, please.
Okay, and it's interesting because her name was Zipporah Bas Shmuel.
There we go.
when Shmuel would have a bad dream, he would say, citing the verse, "Dreams speak falsely."
He would quote the verse, "Dreams are false."
When he would have a good dream, he would ask this as a rhetorical question: "Dreams speak falsely?"
Jews still do that, right? Dreams speak falsely. Jews still do that, right?
But the verse states, "I will speak to him in a dream."
So dream speaks falsely. Doesn't the verse say I will speak to him in a dream? So Shmuel would give the Jewish answer. It depends. Bad dream, dismiss it. Good dream, okay.
Rabbi Bizna Bar Zavda said in the name of Rabbi Akiva, who said in the name of Rabbi Pando, who said in the name of Rabbi Nachum, who said in the name of Biram.
And I've never heard of this Biram before, so this is interesting.
Who said in the name of a certain elder, Rabbi Bena'ah,
Mhm.
there were 24 dream interpreters in Jerusalem.
Oh my, quite competition. When you're driving down the highway and you see that little.
Yeah.
So this wasn't tarot readers, this was dream interpreters. This is different. This is, all right.
I once had a dream and went to see all of them. Each one gave me a different interpretation, and every interpretation was fulfilled. Oh my. This fulfills what is said that all dreams follow the interpretation.
So this teaching is sometimes less significant than the dream itself, is what we make of it. In a sense, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy in that it becomes actualized. The dream isn't an abstract, but when we think about it and dwell on it, that idea can be more real to us in our life. So Rabbi Elazar continues on that note, please.
For Rabbi Elazar said, how do we know that all dreams follow their interpretation? The verse states, and it came to pass just as he had interpreted for us.
In other words, it came to pass not as the dream had said, but it came to pass that which was interpreted. So the interpretation itself is significant. And Rava finally says,
Rava said, this applies only when the interpretation matches the dream. As it says, he interpreted according to the
okay,
dream.
so it seems as if the dream could be interpreted in numerous ways. If it's one of those ways, there's significance to the way it is interpreted. And again, this is all within those dreams that have significance. But that is why I said at the beginning, if God forbid one is bothered by a dream, the Kabbalists say, don't dwell on it, don't talk about it, don't stress over it, rather remove it from your mind. Because the stressing itself can be as potent, if not more so, in the dream itself. All right.
Rabbi,
Let us, yes.
Is it sort of like the modern day horoscope that everyone in the world can interpret a personal connection with, and you can apply it to yourself? Would it almost be the same way?
Yeah, I would say horoscopes is its own category. They have some similarities. Horoscopes is its own category. That's a different art. That has to do with stars, and that's a completely different art. Here it is, dreams. And again, I'll say with what I said at the beginning. Even Torah says, like science says, most dreams are a product of what you thought about during the day. That is the general line of thinking. Sometimes there's significance. And yes, you're right, there can be numerous ways that it can be interpreted. Yeah, and then let's
So
dive
I
into the
also
text.
think that's true of thoughts, not just dreams. If you're dwelling on the dream, that's where your thoughts are, and your thoughts
Become.
seem to affect what's going to be in your life.
Correct. They can. Now let's go back to our parsha. So now that we know dreams can be significant, and now that we know that the interpretation of the dream can be significant, you would imagine, if you were a dream interpreter, you would always want to give a good spin, right? If you believe in this stuff, you always want to give a good spin. So our question is, again, we're customers that way. So our question is, we have a series of dreams at this point in the Torah, and Joseph gives a very good interpretation for one and a very bad interpretation for the other. And our question is, what prompted Joseph to do that? Now, the other interesting piece of this is the Torah explains these dreams at great length. Obviously, there's a lesson for us. Now, there's another story a few weeks from now where Pharaoh has a dream, and that's also explained at great length. That has pretty big significance in the big scheme of things. There's a famine in Egypt. The Jews end up coming down to Egypt. I can understand the space the Torah allots to that dream. But the dream in this one, why does the Torah go on and on about it unless there's something we can learn from the details of the story? What are the details in the story? Here is the long text. Here it goes. 184. Hal, why don't you start? Your mouth is full. Brian, read.
Now it came about after these events that the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and the baker sinned against their master, against the king of Egypt.
The Midrash writes, a fly was found in the goblet of Pharaoh. So that was a big crime. If you're the cupbearer, you pour the king's wine, how dare there be a fly? Now you could say, you can't control what flies into the cup, right? Yeah. And the sin of the baker was that a pebble, a stone, was found in there. Maybe you don't have to be a dream interpreter to know that it's worse for a stone to be in the bread than a fly to be in a cup, because one's more in your control, one's more out of your control. That just came to me right now. But here goes.
Okay. And
Thank
Pharaoh-
God we don't have pharaohs like this today that imprison the guy because I hope we don't. May we always not have, because a stone was found in their bread.
And Pharaoh became incensed at his chief chamberlains and the chief cupbearer and at the chief baker. And he placed them in the prison of the house of the chief of the slaughterers, into the prison, the place where Joseph was imprisoned. And the chief of the slaughterers appointed Joseph to be with them, and he served them, and they were a year in prison.
1 year they were together with Joseph in prison. Here goes.
Now both of them had a dream, each one of his dream on the same night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison. And it's pretty wordy. And
Yeah.
Joseph came to them in the morning, and he saw them, and behold, they were troubled. And he asked the Pharaoh's chamberlains who were with him in the prison of his master's house, saying, "Why are your faces sad today?" And they said to him, "We have had a dream today, and there's no interpreter for it." And Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me now." So the cupbearer related his dream to Joseph. He said to him, "In my dream, behold, a vine is before me, and on the vine are 3 tendrils, and it seemed to be blossoming, and the buds came out. Then its clusters ripened into grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I placed the cup in Pharaoh's palm." And Joseph said to him, "This is the meaning. The 3 tendrils are 3 days. In another 3 days Pharaoh will number you with the other officers, and he will restore you to your position. You will place Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your previous custom when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when things go well for you, and please do me a favor and mention me to Pharaoh, and you will get me out of this house. For I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews, and here too I have done nothing for which they have put me into this dungeon." Now the chief baker saw what he had interpreted well, and so he said to Joseph, "Me too. In my dream, behold, there were 3 wicker baskets on my head, and the topmost basket were all kinds of Pharaoh's food, the work of the baker, and the birds were eating them from the basket atop my head." And Joseph replied and said, "This is the meaning. The 3 baskets represent 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will remove your head from you and hang you on a gallows, and the birds will eat your flesh with you." Now it came about on the 3rd day.
Okay, you can stop there. That is exactly what happened. Pharaoh executed the baker, and Pharaoh reinstated the butler. This is a lot of real estate. This is very wordy.
Yeah, and it's not just that there's a story here, but it's verbose.
Yeah.
You know, like he's going on and talking about how more than once that he's the same, that they're cohabitating. They could have said that once. You didn't have to repeat it.
So there's a lot in here that's odd. The Torah spends so much time. Now, it's an important story because this is the story that eventually leads to Joseph getting out of prison years later. It still seems long.
It's years later he gets out.
Yeah,
It
2
says,
years.
I look at the last verse that I cut you off. The
But
chief cupbearer did not remember, and he
Oh,
forgot him.
okay, great. Well, I mean, there is one thing this is doing, which is outside of the number of column entries, but this is setting up the credibility of Joseph's dream interpretations.
Correct.
So if we want him to be a credible reporter later, we've had that established.
Yet it says he's not the interpreter. God is. Joseph says God is.
But he gets
he gets the job done.
All right, whether he's a prophet, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Is he a dream interpreter like the 24 in Jerusalem with a little sign, or is this prophecy? And there's a difference. The difference is, if it is prophecy, then you might say there's little that we can learn from the story. Joseph was a prophet. This is what he saw in the dreams. There's no rhyme and rhythm to why he said that. That's what he interpreted. If, on the other hand, this is more of a dream interpretation, then it must be that there is some lesson. Why was it that Joseph interpreted it this way? Could he not have said that the baker's dream also represents in 3 days you'll be back to your business of baking bread? If you had to interpret those dreams, you could have just as well done it the other way. So why was it that Joseph decided that? And I'm asking this question specifically because the Torah goes on and on about these dreams. And I believe there must be a message then in the actual dream interpretations. There's a positive lesson in one more than the other. And that is what allowed Joseph to see it that way. Now, not everyone says this. Some people say, and we'll read this right from the beginning.
I do have
Brian.
a couple thoughts for you.
Sure.
So on the interpretation versus
Prophecy.
side, he responded immediately. And you know, if prophecy, among other things, you get communication overnight, then
Right.
maybe he'd have to sleep on it to get an interpretation.
That's interesting.
If he needed
Good.
it, whereas he had it right there. So I would say that's interpretation. That was interpretation of the prophecy that came to the gentleman.
Right. Right.
You know, so on that, that's my answer on that one.
Good.
On the,
Differences between
oh, the
the two.
differences. Well, to me, the baker story is one of being pecked apart.
The birds are not eating him; they're eating the bread, though.
the bread that's on his head, and it's his product. I don't know. I do see that as a more, negative
More negative as opposed
Yeah.
to serving.
wine. He's taking grapes and squeezing the grapes into
Okay,
wine. He's
and-
making the wine to
Okay,
be consumed in a normal way. The
interesting.
bread is being destroyed by the.
See, we're
farmers.
becoming dream interpreters today.
Yeah.
I mean,
Good.
Couldn't it be that he also, what he said came to be?
Well, then all the more reason why do it to the poor baker. If you want to say he was a prophet.
yeah, and I'm saying that he's just interpreting.
So we have a discussion here about this very issue. The Abarbanel, who was a great commentator who lived in actually Portugal in the 1400s. Let's go to text 3. Jackie, why don't you read text 3, 190.
Excuse me.
This is, he writes,
Text 3.
like you said, Hal. Like you said.
Joseph replied, "Don't interpretations belong to God? In other words, don't think that your dreams can be fully interpreted with human effort and wisdom. For one detail of a dream can allude to many different interpretations. Therefore, it is almost impossible to interpret dreams without mixing some false details into the interpretation. For interpretations belong to God, i.e., it is only possible to fully interpret a dream by divine inspiration that can reveal what is hidden."
So the Abarbanel saying there's no art to this, there's no wisdom to it. It must be something that is prophetic. If it's prophetic, there's not so much we can learn from it. However, as you pointed out, Brian, he did answer on the spot. Other commentators say it differently.
I don't know why you're saying we can't learn from prophecy.
Okay, you're saying even if it was prophecy. My question is, was there a rationale to Joseph's interpretation? Or was it fed from above? That's my question. There's more room to learn from the details of the story if it was logical, and you're saying not necessarily.
Right.
Because we can learn from.
Prophecy.
Okay.
It ain't
I mean, the whole-
necessarily.
Yeah.
All the teachings of the prophets.
We still learn. Good point. Good. I stand corrected. Valid point. So either way, whether it was prophecy or interpretation, our question is, what's the message? Why was it that the butler's dream was interpreted positively, the baker's negatively, especially if we believe the interpretation itself has power? What did Joseph see in one, not the other? Now, here's one interpretation. Let's just do this quickly. Text 5, Judy.
Text 5 is right here. The baker's conduct was deficient. When Joseph told them that interpretations belong to God, the butler immediately related his dream, for he was a believer. But the baker stalled. Only after he saw that Joseph had interpreted well, the butler's dream did he proceed to relate his own. In this he lacked faith, and therefore his interpretation did not turn out well, while the butler, who didn't hesitate, was meritorious and received a good interpretation.
Like that
Oh,
one?
You gotta
No.
have a movie.
So he says, dreams belong to God. The butler says, I'm in. Tell me what it is. The baker's sort of on the fence, and then, all right, you did a good job here. I'm going to join. So this is, yeah.
But they were likely idolaters. So,
Yeah.
What God?
But
From their
interesting,
perspective.
even though they were that, they spent a year with Joseph in jail. So don't you think that Joseph could have done something to these guys for a whole year?
That's good.
He's
Gets
gotta be
good power.
telling them about God, about,
One of, by the way, one of the verses one of my favorite verses in the entire Torah that I passed over when you read the story, Brian,
Yes.
is Joseph sees them in the morning. Their faces are down, and Joseph says, Madua panecha zoakim hayom. Why are you melancholy today? He asked that question.
I'm sorry,
Why are you sad?
yes.
What do you mean, why are you sad? They're in prison. Of course they're sad. And yet, Joseph noticed something was wrong in their face. He took the time, even when he himself was down in the dumps, to figure out what it was. That question, Madua Panecha Zoakim Hayom, turned around history. Had he not asked that question, he wouldn't have interpreted the dreams. So his care, even when everything was going wrong in his life, I know during times when you're in a hard place, sometimes it's hard to have that same sensitivity to other people because you're consumed in your own misery. Joseph was bothered by the fact that someone's looking sad today, even though they were in prison. So I think that's an overlooked verse. I like that verse a lot. When we see someone who looks down, to take the time, to take the care to say, something on your mind. Be a little proactive. You don't want to meddle in someone's business, but I think that's a piece that's overlooked here. So maybe Joseph did have a relationship with them throughout that year, the fact that he asked that question, perhaps. Here is going to be our main interpretation today about why Joseph saw good signs in the butler's dream and bad signs in the negative dream. But in order to understand that, we have to begin with something the Talmud says. Here goes. Where are we up to in the reading?
Okay. Text 7a?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The Dubno Magid.
Oh, no, 6. I'm sorry,
Oh,
6.
Okay.
This is from the Talmud.
Okay. What is the source of the 4 cups of wine at the Passover Seder? Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, they correspond to the 4 cups of Pharaoh, i.e. the 4 times Pharaoh's cup is mentioned in the cup.
Oh,
Well, that's kind of
wow.
that's random. I always heard the 4 cups of wine are about Exodus and 4 cups of wine, and it's like saying we should eat
Wow.
cheesecake 3 times on Shavuot because there were 3 baskets on the baker's head. I mean, it doesn't add up. What is the relationship at all?
But weren't there 3 cups of wine?
No, it says 4 times cups was mentioned in the story of
There
the
were
butler.
4 cups of
I would imagine the Talmud counted it, right? But let's.
Yeah, I agree. They kind of.
But we can.
The 3 cups. that
but-
was mentioned.
but- Is it not fair to ask the question, what in the world is the correlation between the 2 ideas? The butler's cup of wine is mentioned 4 ideas, so at the Passover Seder we drink 4 cups of wine. What is that? What is that about? So that's going to be our clue into what it was about the butler's dream that made Joseph see something positive. And we can contrast that with the baker. So there was a great sage whose name was the Dubno Magid. And whenever he would explain Torah insights, he would always do it with a parable. He was famous for his parables. So he wanted to explain why was it that the baker's dream was interpreted so negative. And this is what he says. Pam.
The Dubno Maggid gives a nice parable to explain how Joseph knew to interpret the cupbearer's dream for the good and the baker's dream for bad, even though the 2 dreams seem to contain a similar message.
Look at his metaphor. This is the key text today.
There was once a painting of a man with a basket of bread on his head. A live bird swooped down to the picture and began to peck at the bread in the basket. 2 men passing by stopped to marvel at the sight. The first man said, "This painter is so talented. His painting looks so real that the bird thinks the bread is real." His friend replied, "He is not so talented, for he only managed to make the bread look real, but not the person. If the person would look real, the bird would be afraid to approach it." So too here, when Joseph heard the baker say, "The birds were eating them from the basket atop of my head," he realized that standing before him is essentially a dead person, a shadow. Therefore he said to him, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will remove your head from you."
So he saw a passivity. He saw a inaction from the part of the baker. And it's not just this text. If we go and we compare and contrast, do you have that chart? When we go and compare and contrast all the text of the dreams, we see a fascinating difference. The butler is active throughout. The baker is passive throughout. So in the Dubna's Magid's example, what's the sign of someone who is not full of life? Birds will approach them. Birds are not afraid of them. Someone that's alive has movement. But it goes one step further. Dennis, in the butler's dream.
In the butler's dream, he was acting, doing something with his own hands and moving like a person. As the verse states, Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup. These actions reflect a live person capable of action. Therefore, Joseph knew this man was destined to live, and interpreted his dream accordingly. But the baker did nothing in his dream. Instead, everything happened to him like a dead person who cannot do a thing. Birds are eating from them, the basket atop my head. Thus Joseph knew that this man was destined to die.
So what the Dubna Magid is suggesting that the sign of life is movement. Movement is the sign of life. So let's go through the chart. First of all, the butler was the one that took the initiative to ask and say, hey, help me out. The baker? Well, me too. He said, a vine was before me, the other one, it was on my head. He not only serves the wine, but he's involved from beginning to the end. It's in my hand, and I took the grapes, and I squeezed it. I placed the cup. He's there throughout the entire process. He was present and acting. And sadly, the difference between life and death is the ability to act, the ability to move. But this goes one step further here. Now we're getting into the lesson. Not in dream interpreters, you don't have to worry about, but life we do have to worry about. And life is, the sign of life is action. The sign of being passive, being dead in a situation, let's not talk about dead at all, but dead in a situation is inaction. Being a victim. And I think Joseph personified this idea so well in his own life that each time life dealt him a blow, he always was moving about and trying to do something about it and make the most of it. When he was thrown into prison as a slave, he worked his way up. He was trying to think, why is this happening? He was looking for purpose and mission. He was always doing something, seeing it as a mission. Much later in the story, when he reveals himself to his brothers say, hey, we're sorry for selling you here. And he says, y'all didn't sell me here. God sent me here. What's the difference between sold and sent? Active.
Well, a number of things.
Right. Now, that's not to say the brothers weren't at fault. They were. But sent means I was here for a reason. And A, there's purpose. And B is there was something I was always trying to do about my circumstance. So I believe this might be one of the meanings in what it said, the 4 cups of wine. Why does the Talmud relate the 4 cups of wine of Exodus to the 4 cups of the butler story? Is that the Jews, the redemption happens when one doesn't give up hope. That's what redemption is. Going out of Egypt represents the Jews having a desire to get out, the desire not to serve Pharaoh, but to serve God. Never abandoning hope, never viewing themselves as a victim. So the Talmud says, who did that? The butler did. In the butler's dream, what was he dreaming about? One day, once again, being able to serve Pharaoh again and fulfill his mission, whatever mission that was, serving wine to Pharaoh. And not just doing that, but squeezing the wine. And he was dreaming about it. He was never dead to his circumstances. He was always alive in his dreams. Similarly, throughout the Passover story, we say that the Jews never abandon hope. I may have explained this here once before, but in Hebrew, there are 2 different words for being sad or being upset about a circumstance. One is a word that is very popular in the Passover story. It's maror. Maror literally means bitter. It means to be bitter about a situation. The other word is atzav or atzvut, which means depressed. And often in Jewish literature, sad or depressed. Both words can be used often interchangeably, but there's actually a big difference according to Hasidus and Kabbalah. There's a difference between atzvut and mirirut. Everyone got those two words? Bitter and sad. Bitter is frustrated about a situation and wanting to do something about it. Atzvut is a sadness that paralyzes you. One leads to action, one leads to inaction. One focuses on a particular issue, and one is all encompassing.
Which
That
word
is
was used?
Marirut, maror. They embittered their lives.
No. Back in
Neither.
this-
Oh, why is your panecha? A third
When
word.
you said
A
melancholy.
third word.
Okay.
A third word. A third word. But that is why I find it interesting that when the Jews were in Egypt, it says that the night before they left, they were told, I want you to have a little Seder. God says, have a little Seder, have the lamb, have matzah, and have
Maror.
have maror. The purpose of maror is to remember the bitter. What kind of memory would they have to remember at that time? God forbid, can you imagine telling a Holocaust survivor in the in the DP in the camp in the what were they called?
Concentration
No, but not, right afterwards where they
The
went.
DP
The
camps.
DP camps. All right, I want you to remember the slave. You don't have to remember. Those people didn't have to remember.
Remembering is for the future.
Exactly. So why were they asked to have maror that night? So you could say because the future generations were going to have maror, so too they had maror. There's a beautiful interpretation. It's a positive trait. They never had atzvut. They only had marorness. Throughout their entire slavery, it never got to the point where I am a slave. This is my destiny. This is who I am. They never defined themselves by it. That also is, of course, the name of one of the heroines of the Passover story, Miriam. Miriam means bitterness. Yeah, that's what it means. But it's a positive kind of bitterness. It's a positive, the name itself is she never came to terms with the slavery. That's why we see in her story many times she went against the midwife, she went against Pharaoh's orders, she rescued Moshe. She was frustrated about the situation.
And taking action.
I'm taking action.
She
I'm
even
not
told her father that
correct.
Yeah.
It's
She found a wet nurse.
correct. I'm doing something. Maybe I can't do everything, but there must be something I can do right now that shows I don't agree with the situation and improve my lot even 1%. That is the ability to act. And that is what Pharaoh saw in the baker letting the predicament get to him and just standing there. And Yiddishkeit, Jewish history, is full of amazing men and women that never did that. They always acted. And I think of Holocaust survivors that moved down to the country and rebuilt their lives. Think of Eretz Yisrael and Israel and all the action that is needed. So that is sort of the take home from the story. And in our own lives, when we're faced with, we all have tzaras and challenges, and sometimes there isn't anything we can do, but often there is something. And a sign of life is doing that, not resigning ourselves. So there's a beautiful text from the Rebbe in Hayom Yom, text 8. Where are we up to in the reading? Were you read Dennis? Read how?
Sighing alone will not bring us salvation. Sighing is only a doorknob that unlocks the heart and opens the eyes, so that one will not sit idly with folded arms.
So this is one of the, every single day there's this Hasidic message of the day. So one day, actually is in a few weeks, this is the Hayom Yom of the day, the daily thought. Sighing alone doesn't bring salvation. What it does do is, hopefully it can lead to action, and keep on reading.
Instead, one should plan one's efforts and take action, every individual according to his ability, towards the goal of buttressing and
Disseminating, spreading.
disseminating the study of Torah and the observance of its mitzvahs. One person through writing, another one through public speaking, and another with his financial resources.
My guess was the quote was originally said during a time of the Soviet oppression, when it was tough, was really, really bad, and it was hard to live as Jews. So that's when the Rebbe said, sighing alone is not enough. We have to do whatever little bit we can do to improve the situation, do it. And I think it's very relevant. Throughout lives, there are things we're upset about, whether in our personal lives or at the world at large? If it's the world at large, do something. You can't change the world. Change something in your own life to one other person. Action. Anytime we're upset about a situation, how can we be more like the butler and less like the baker? How can we have some action? The next text was, one action is better than 1,000 sighs. Yeah, abandoning sighing, apply yourself to actual avodah, actual work. There's an interesting story where there was a Hasidic Farbrengen taking place in underground in Soviet Union. There was a gathering. They were doing some Torah, and they were sitting around talking about how they could be better Jews. And the leader, the mentor, was talking to a group of people about what they should do in their own lives to be better people. And the people were listening, and some of them got emotional and said, it's a good idea. I need to think about this. And they were even crying a little bit at how these were heartfelt discussions, how they need to be better. All of a sudden, someone ran in the room and said, we see some Soviet soldiers coming down. Immediately they sprung to action, and one person said, hey, let's go out the window. The other person said, hey, let's pretend we're doing something else. And immediately they were, right afterwards, it was a false call, and they resumed the Farbrengen. But the mentor said, how come when it came to the material concern, a physical concern, everyone immediately sprung to action? When it came to me talking about the spiritual concerns, there was a lot of sighing and a lot of thinking. So he was talking about this idea when something is real to you. Imagine how tough they were on their people. Here they were as a false call, and he afterwards uses it as a message to his. And he says he told his people crying is for when you feel there's nothing you can do, but there's got to be something you can do. Now, God forbid, I'm not dismissing crying. You have to express emotion, of course. And there are times in life after the fact where there's nothing you can do anymore, and that's when you have to have acceptance and closure and crying. But when we're in the midst of a predicament, the message from this lesson is
Inaction is better than
exactly. So let's do the last thought of the Rebbe, text 10. Barbara, text 10. This is also from the Rebbe when the Rebbe was explaining this thought.
My father-in-law, the Rebbe, did not reckon with sighs. The sighing is contrary to the path of Kedusha.
Wow, Chassidus. So he wasn't a big fan of sighing. Yeah.
The reason for this is that as long as the soul is in the body, one has a mission from God, who allotted him a certain amount of days to fulfill that mission. Consequently, just as God did not create a thing in the world for naught, there is no such thing as extra time to waste. Every day and every second must be used properly. As my father-in-law, the Rebbe, said, in the name of
That Tzemach Tzedek.
So that we are
Day work.
day workers. Our job is to brighten the world.
And in a sense, Joseph being in prison had a lot of crying to do, and yet when he saw people who were in a bad situation, he stopped and said, how can I help you today? And I think we'll hold it over here. I think the crying is a good first step because one needs to assess the situation. But then right afterwards, we should know that real avodah means action. Even if it's a little bit of action, that is a sign of life. That is a sign of yearning for something better. And that is the way that we ultimately change the world. And that would be the difference between the butler and the baker and why Joseph interpreted the dreams that way. So hold it here. Yes?
I want to go back to something you said about hope, and the Israelites did not lose hope in the Exodus. Yet there were times they said, we're better off in Egypt.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, with the 4 cups, were there 4 major times that they did that in the Exodus?
That's interesting. Yeah. I would, you know what? So it's
You're supposed
going
to
back
let
to
it
what
die
you
off.
said. Yeah, there were definitely stages where the Jews had given up. And I think it's true of everyone. Of course, there's moments where we throw in the towel. We all that's part of it. We have to rebound from those moments. How?
But there's still
Every-
action,
every-
still action in what you're talking about, even if it's giving up and going back. They didn't just sit around and say, oh, we're just gonna sit here and give up.
Right.
They
Right.
There were
Let's go
times.
back to
There
Egypt.
might have been times. But I think no. But I
Still
wanna.
action.
I want to mention, I want to acknowledge that, and I think that's a deeper idea. Even though we all have days like that, but that can't define us. And just because we're that way for a day or two, Hal, that shouldn't limit or stop us from the next day dreaming and leading to action. And I think we live in a world today, I'll say this, often people love just the emotions and the feelings and the crying because it makes you feel good, right? You feel you've done something. You feel that being upset did something, and I feel good. Feeling good is one thing, but feeling good doesn't change. The mitzvah changes the world. And a lot of times we stop at the being upset about a situation because it grants us a certain amount of inner satisfaction that we are upset. And the next step is, okay, but how can I do one mitzvah based upon that feeling? How can I channel out that sadness into a merirut, even if it's something small, because that ultimately is a sign of life. All right, we'll hold it here. Thank you, anyone who was tuning in from online. We would love to hear questions or comments or feedback. And we will, God willing, be here next week as well, and then we will break for 2 weeks.
Rabbi, you want to tell everybody about the lighting of the menorah? Just announce
Yes,
it.
if anyone is listening locally or out North Carolina, we will be having a beautiful downtown Apex menorah lighting December 26th, Monday night. The mayor's going to be there. There's someone here as a result of our JLI class who's organizing a drive for the wildfires the same night, those North Carolinians and Israel that were affected by wildfires. And the theme is going to be turning the negative fire into a positive fire. That's December 26th, 5 p.m., downtown Apex. A beautiful community lighting. All right. Have a good week.
You're tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.